Hello, good evening, and welcome to Military Images Live. I'm Ron Coddington, the editor and publisher of Military Images, and we're very excited to have the next episode in season 2. This is episode 5 of season 2, and we welcome all of you to be part of tonight's broadcast. We're going to let just a minute or so go by so folks can come on and get settled. I see we've got Michael Pissarro. Hello, Mike. Doug York from Civil War Faces is here. How are you doing, my friend? Rick Wolf. Hey, Rick, how are you doing this evening? Let me see. Jeff is here. Jeff Jambrone. Hello, Jeff. How are you doing? Folks are now coming on, and very excited to have all of you here. Coming off of a big weekend, and a lot of it really to talk about this weekend, you have to go back some months ago to a conversation with Doug York of Civil War Faces. Doug had an opportunity to be a host of the DC Civil War, the DC Photo and Postcard Show. And long story short, Military Images and Doug York got together, and we hosted a room that turned into a whole series of events. And as many of you know who are followers of this page, thank you for the thumbs up. As all of you know who are followers of this page and of Civil War Faces, it turned into a weekend of events that included a tour of the Library of Congress, a behind-the-scenes tour, a series of speakers on Saturday night, and then the DC Photo and Postcard Show on Sunday. So I wanted to share a little bit for those of you who were not able to come to the DC area for the show, and for those of you who weren't able to join us on Facebook Live while we were broadcasting, I thought I'd share just a few of the highlights. And the first one begins on Friday night. I should mention we had twice as many folks sign up for the tour, which was wonderful. So we had to break into 2 separate tour groups to be able to get everyone in. And one of my most favorite moments was seeing these glass plate negatives right here. The most prominent one on the right, you can barely maybe make out. So I'll help you by showing you this print made from that negative. This is actually the original Brady glass plate negative of Ulysses S. Grant leaning against the tree. To be able to see that in person was really quite amazing. Another set of negatives that I want to share with you that we got to see are right here. They were sitting next to the negative of Grant, and they are part of the series of images of the famous Council of War, including General Grant and General Meade, where the pews were taken outside of the church at Massaponax, Virginia. And so to be able to see those, we weren't able to touch them, and we wouldn't. I was too frightened to get close to them. But to see those negatives was really quite amazing. So the next night, on Saturday night, we had a series of speakers from the National Portrait Gallery, from the National Archives, from the Library of Congress. We had Dr. Kurt Luther from Civil War Photo Sleuth, and Military Images senior editor Rick Brown. And I wanted to share with you one takeaway that I think you'll enjoy from each of those presentations. So from the National Portrait Gallery, and this was a presentation, an overview of the Civil War holdings in the National Portrait Gallery, given to us by Anne Schumard, who is a senior curator of photography at the NPG. She talked to us about the fact that there's 5,400 glass plate negatives that are currently being digitized or in progress of being digitized of Civil War soldiers. Now there's some generals, but there's also a number of officers below the rank of general that are featured on these glass plate negatives. So guess what, fellow collectors and the entire community of Civil War photo enthusiasts? There's going to be 5,400 images out there that are going to need our help to try to identify. So stand by for more information as that collection comes online and becomes available to all of us. All right. From the Library of Congress, we had another great presentation, a survey of all the holdings in the Library of Congress by Micah Messenheimer. Micah is the same gentleman who led the tour on Friday. And Micah shared a bunch of information about the library, including the fact that 7,000 negatives and related prints from the Brady collection are in the collection, plus more than 3,500 images from the Lillenquist family collection. So right there, over 10,500 images of the Civil War, many of them available in high resolution TIFFs for you to use, for you to explore. So go on to loc.gov and search the collection and start photo sleuthing. Our third presentation on Friday evening was Dr. Kurt Luther from Civil War Photo Sleuth. One of the great takeaways, I thought, was the fact that, according to Kurt, the first photo sleuths actually surfaced during the Civil War itself. And you might be surprised to know where they came from. The U.S. Post Office. There were a number of letters that were undeliverable for a variety of reasons. They were misaddressed. Perhaps the soldier went missing, disappeared, was wounded in battle, or died. All those letters were held by a special division of the post office called the Dead Letter Office. Some of you know the story. The images you can see because they've got red numbers on the top or on the bottom and a metal clasp, a metal binder mark at the top. These images were used, they were put on display to try to find the owners. So Kurt makes the argument that they actually were the first photo sleuths right during the war itself. So if you consider yourself a photo sleuth and you want to find out who your ancestors are, your photo sleuth ancestors, they lived from 1861 to 1865. Now, we also met with Brian Cheeseborough of the National Archives, and he shared with us a collection of images that have been found by researchers like you. And those researchers were in military service and pension files. And as they were going through their course of doing research, they found images. And those images were oftentimes used to prove the identity of a soldier or sailor. The detail that I love about what Brian was talking about is that no one knows just how many original photos are waiting to be discovered in those military service and pension records. So next time you're in Washington, go to the National Archives, hunt up some pension files, and you don't know what you might find. Our fifth presentation of the evening was Rick Brown, who is a senior editor of Military Images, and he shared a really interesting tip that I love, and it comes from one of his mentors, Thomas Harris. And here it is. Rick says, what's the one technique you can use to evaluate the compositional balance of an image? In other words, how can you get a sense of the artistry of an image? So when we're looking at whether it's a hard plate or whether it is a carte de visite, Rick suggests this very easy tip that was handed down by Thomas, and that is to flip the image upside down. If you flip the image upside down, you begin to look at it in a different way. You'll begin to see the lines of the composition. You'll get a sense of the balance, and it helps you to be able to judge the artistry of the image. How was the photographer thinking when he posed? How did the soldier want to be posed? This technique can help you. So when you're next looking at your collection, look at them this way. and see what you can get from that. So we also, on Sunday, we had the show itself. And we had a total of 12 dealers that were set up in a room, and had a lot of traffic all day. And at the end of the day, Doug York of Civil War Faces made 2 presentations for Best of Show and Best of Display. So Best of Show went to Paul Boucher, who happens to be from Arlington, Virginia. And you can see Paul accepting his award with Doug and I. And then the Best Display goes to Dave Batallo. And you'll see Dave in the middle here accepting his award. So it was quite exciting for us to have our first ever Civil War photo show. And I don't want to tip the hat too much, but Doug and I are talking about future plans to bring shows to different places around the country. So stay tuned for details. And also, now that you've heard what I've talked about tonight, if you've got ideas for what you'd like to see and what would help you to come to the shows, we want to know. So leave comments on this page, leave comments on Civil War Faces, and we'll see what we can do. So a couple of other things that went on at the show. One of them is we debuted the cover of the spring issue of Military Images, which is going to be mailed this week. And I want to show it to you here. It is a wonderful, amazing tintype, a 9th plate tintype that belongs to the Kevin Canberg collection. And this is an unidentified soldier with what Doug York calls a pip. It's a picture in a picture. So if you look right over here, you can see that this soldier is holding what appears to be a quarter plate ambrotype or a tintype, and it's definitely a soldier that's in there. Who was the soldier? Was it a brother? Was it another family member? Was it a comrade? Was it someone who died of disease or in battle? These things we don't know right now, but we're going to try and find out. So a wonderful image from Kevin's, and inside you'll find a related number of different stories, a related story about memorial photographs. So be sure to stay tuned for that. If you're not a subscriber, now is a great time. If you can subscribe, you'll get this issue as your first issue. So if you're thinking about subscribing and have not taken the chance, now is the time to do it. So I also want to share with you a couple of images that we scanned at the show. And the first one that I want to tell you about is really appropriate. Although it's called the DC Photo Show, it was held in Arlington, Virginia, very, very short distance from Arlington Memorial Cemetery, Arlington National Cemetery, pardon me. And this gentleman is wearing what appears to be some sort of a pleated, perhaps it almost looks like a battle shirt of some kind, could be a shirt worn by a firefighter. Not quite sure of the details, but what becomes especially interesting here is the note that's in the top of the case. And it says, James Downey, born in Ohio in 1843, died in 1865, a soldier in the war. It goes on to talk about one wounded in one of the last days of the war, died in Washington and buried in Arlington Cemetery in 1865. So a really interesting inscription and a powerful image to boot. So I did a little bit of quick research to get some basic information. And basically, he is in fact James Downey, and he served in the 6th Ohio Cavalry, which matches the ID of being from Ohio. He definitely died in 1865. He died on April the 26th, 1865, after being wounded in the Battle of Five Forks, which was 25 days earlier on April 1st. And he, in fact, is buried in Arlington Cemetery. He has a stone, and I'll be going there to visit and encourage you the next time you're in Washington to do the same thing. One of the other images that we scanned comes from the Adam Oakes Fleischer collection, and quite taken with this image, pardon me. It's a young man, And it says Master Thomas, it looks like Gessens of Dunkirk, and it's dated September 14th, 1863. Now, in fact, there is a Thomas Gerrans. I've got his Navy rendezvous report right here. And Thomas J. Gerrans had a rendezvous at New York on September 12th, 1863. Now, keep this in mind, September 12th, 1863. Remember the date here, September 14th, 1863. So according to the report, he lands in New York on September 12th. 2 days later, he signs this image. And guess what? The image was made in New York City by Jordan Company, which is a successor to the well-known photographer, Abraham Bogardus. So here we have an image. One of the first things that he did after coming ashore in New York was, guess what? To sit for his photograph. There's some bad news here. He goes back on duty onto the gunboat Vicksburg and is stationed along the South Atlantic blockading squadron. And he dies on July 24th, 1864. So less than a year after this image is made, he dies. Now, I wasn't able to find out the cause of death. I assume it might be disease, because on the date that he died, there's no action that I could find that involves the gunboat Vicksburg. So there's a project there. We need to do more work to find out what was the cause of his death and more about his family, how he came to be in the Navy. I can tell you that there is 2 dates for his age. In one account, it says he's 16, and in another account, he's 17. He's also, his rank is a first-class cabin boy. So he's a young man, a teenager in New York, joins the Navy, and less than a year later, he dies. So that is the story of Thomas J. Gerrans. More to come on that. Another image that I want to share with you tonight comes from Dave Batala's collection. If you are interested in Virginia images and you're interested in Virginia Military Institute or the state of North Carolina, you'll be interested in this photograph. This is Cadet Henry King Bergland Jr. It may be a name that is familiar to you. He was at VMI in the late 50s and the early 60s, and he is best known for becoming the colonel, a young colonel, of the 26th North Carolina Infantry. He lost his life in action in Gettysburg, where the 26th North Carolina performed heroically as it fought in the battle. There's quite a bit of detail about his death that Dave Batalo and Rusty Hicks, they've co-written a story with some information I haven't seen before. So that is in process of being edited, and you're going to see this image along with the story and a couple of other surprises in our summer issue. So stay tuned for that. Another scan we made at the show is from the collection of Paul Sparks. Paul is a great supporter of the magazine, and we've featured images of his in the past. He came by with this wonderful, speaking of youngsters, here is a young, not much more than a boy, dressed in a Zouave uniform. And by all accounts, Paul and I talked about this. It appears to be definitely a uniform. It's not a costume. This is the real thing. It has all the elements. He's got the leggings, the shoes, the baggy pants, the typical jacket that you would expect, the cap. And he's also holding the sword. And as Paul observed, he's holding the sword with some bit of authority. He doesn't look like he's afraid of it. He looks like he's comfortable, in fact, with it. He has his hand resting on the pommel, and it's just a wonderful image. We also notice that he's standing very comfortably, very casually. You can see the cast iron stand behind him that usually holds your neck in place while you're posing. He doesn't appear to have needed that there, although it was in place just in case he wanted to hold steady. One more image I want to share with you. This one comes from the Paul Boucher collection. And as I mentioned earlier, he was one of the award winners at the show. And great image of two comrades, two pards, Union soldiers standing side by side. And if you look closely, you're going to see something that really caught my attention. Look on his jacket. There's what looks like a big Q. Now, if you were paying attention from our show a few weeks ago, you would remember this Q came up in another image right here, this C.D. Viva soldier with the same Q on his chest. And you may recall that we were fairly stumped by it. I talked to the Military Images, some of our senior editors, some other contributors to find out what they knew about it. And it turns out that what he has on, what he's wearing, is a blanket pin, which is something that dates to Europe hundreds of years before the Civil War, could be of Scotch-Irish origin. And this pin was used, as it's described, is to hold a blanket in place. So for the first time last month, I saw one of these. And so who would have thought that just a few weeks later, another one would turn up? So the call goes out for blanket pins. Definitely interested to know more about those. So that concludes the Civil War Faces weekend. And I want to give a big thanks to Doug and Darlene York. I want to give a big thanks to everyone who participated, all the speakers. And again, I want to mention them: Micah Messenheimer, Ann Schumard, Dr. Kurt Luther, Brian Cheeseborough, Rick Brown. I want to thank Julie Baker, who was tuning in to the video cast the entire 3 hours looking for your questions. And it was a great event. We hope to participate next year. So we've got just a little bit of time left. I have more information than I can get to, so we're going to hold on to some of this for the next program. But we'll go into one more here. This is a cabinet card. And the gentleman pictured is a colonel, and his name is James Malcolm Brown, and he was in the 100th New York Infantry. This cabinet card was copied from a Civil War era image. And what you can see here is just a very nicely reproduced image in a 5x7 format. The card was carried by Brown's wife. Her name is Charlotte Brown, and she carried this to a reunion of the regiment around 1875 or so. And this is an important fact because she was known as the mother of the regiment because of her role, her husband being the colonel. She became the mother of the regiment. Now, Colonel Brown did not survive the war. And why I want to show this to you, not only because it's an interesting memorial image, but I want to tell you that this is one of the rare examples, the only one that comes to my mind in recent memory, of a high-ranking officer who went absolutely missing in battle. And so it was at the Battle of Seven Pines in 1862. And there's a couple of accounts that I've pieced together here to give you a little bit of background on what happened to him. And here's the first part of it. It says, when his regiment entered into active service, he lived as others lived, slept on the cold, wet ground, ate soldiers' rations, and in all regards endured the hardships of campaign like the privates. He bore all privations without murmuring for himself, but not without feeling keenly for his men. At Seven Pines, he was in the saddle and his regiment under arms ere the order had reached him to attack. He led them into action with the stern joy which warriors feel when going out to battle. Through the former part of the fight, he sat quietly on his horse, a conspicuous target, calmly smoking his pipe, except when giving orders or executing a movement. When the action grew hot as Hades, he raged up and down the line, encouraging the men by voice and example. His leonine courage roused the light of battle in his eyes, a soldier terrible in his splendid bravery. It continues. In the slashing, The 100th was badly broken up, and when, at length, the reluctant order to retreat was given, it suffered very severely. Colonel Brown was seen, keep this in mind, this is a moment here, he was seen vainly endeavoring to rally his men, and then suddenly disappeared. Strange to say, no absolute knowledge of his fate was ever obtained. Stricken down in the deadly conflict, he was doubtlessly either instantly slain or so severely wounded that he died before his name and rank could be ascertained by the Confederates who swept over the field. Perhaps when wounded, he dragged himself into some thicket, hoping to be able to rejoin the Union troops, and there died unseen by friend or foe. At all events, when after the battle, a detail was sent in the field to bury the dead, Colonel Brown could not be found, and when inquiry was made of the Confederate commander by means of a flag of truce, the reply was that nothing whatever was known of his fate. Perhaps someday we'll learn the fate of Colonel Brown. And with that, I'm going to leave you and take my leave. However, before we go, I'm going to be speaking about Civil War photography in Kenosha, Wisconsin, this Saturday. So if you live in the area of Kenosha or the greater Chicago, Milwaukee area, I urge you to check out our events page here on Facebook, or go visit the Civil War Museum in Kenosha. They are the Civil War Museum of Record of the Upper Midwest. If you've never been there, definitely check it out. I've been once before, and it is an impressive place. Doug Downey is the curator there, and Doug and his crew have made a magnificent showplace to help you understand the contributions of soldiers from the Upper Midwest to the Civil War. Doug has a great show planned, and I'm delighted to participate. So get more information and come out if you can. I would love to see you and meet you in person. Until then, or until a couple weeks when we have our next episode of Military Images, I wish all of you happy hunting, photo sleuthing, and thanks for doing what you do. Take care. Bye now.